The original 2004 Star Wars Battlefront is a title many remember fondly. While you might have originally picked it up, either because of the franchise it's a part of, or because it just seemed like a novel thing to try at the time, surely if you're watching this video, it's because Battlefront 1 left an impression on you. And not without good reason to either. It is simply a fun game, and one that's still being enjoyed by plenty of people, even now 2 decades, a couple spin-offs, a sequel, and a whole franchise reboot later. And I want to make the case that the reason the original Battlefront has lasted so long isn't just because of the brand name it's attached to, or the story, or the nostalgia factor alone, but specifically because as a team-based shooter, it shows off some of the best map design in gaming, period. So please join me as I briefly break down what makes each of the original Star Wars Battlefront's maps so good. Today, I wanted to talk about what I think it's appropriate to call the original Battlefront's darkest map, Endor Bunker. The whole premise of the Star Wars Battlefront series is that each of the games is emulating the big battles of the movies and the expanded universe material, in such a way that you get to participate from the perspective of the average trooper on the ground. These games are made to be appropriate for younger audiences, and the films themselves are relatively light-hearted for a series with wars in its name, but there is obviously at least a little inherent grimness to any media property depicting armed conflict and killing. There's no way around that. And given how the greatness of any given map or location in a game like this could very reasonably be measured by the extent to which it succeeds in capturing the essence of its inspiration, I wanted to use an analysis of Battlefront's Endor map as a way to talk about how this game does tone and atmosphere. Because, for one thing, if any single map in this game can really be said to be dark, I think it would be this one. I don't just mean the literal, relatively low level of lighting the map designers opted for here either, although that itself does certainly play a big part in establishing a particular mood here on Endor. What I mean is how this map, just like its on-screen inspiration, is meant to be evocative of deep forest warfare, where there's enemy ambushes hidden over every hill and behind every giant fallen tree trunk. And there's this highly asymmetric element of one side having access to imposing armoured vehicles, and where half the casualties in any match here are going to be these tiny little native teddy bear creatures, which, far from being any sort of comic relief, they only make the whole thing seem awful once you inevitably start seeing them get mowed down by the dozen. Plus, when you play this map in the campaign, this is the setting of the very last level. This is meant to be the big do-or-die final push. So let's talk about Endor, its place in this game, and what we might learn about Battlefront on the whole through it. As soon as you start up a match here, you get an immediate feel for the aesthetic and the tone the developers were going for. You won't be terribly surprised if you've seen the movies, of course, but Endor here is a pretty dense redwood forest. Many, many trees, including a lot of giant fallen tree trunks, a lot of ground cover foliage, little Ewok village walkways overhead, and a fortified Imperial military presence. I mentioned earlier how this map is meant to convey that dark forest warfare vibe, and Endor's visual design goes a long way there, without a doubt. But as much as this map is set in a big open forest with no apparent end, on a technical level, you can think of Endor Bunker as essentially being one big rectangular corridor. A very wide corridor, and one where the literal battle front will usually span the entire width of the map, but it's still a linear procession of 6 command points in a row. And given that this map is only playable in the Empire versus Rebel Alliance era, what teams get what command posts is always the same. The southern end of the map is a staging ground for the Rebel attack. Here there's free places to spawn in under the relative cover of the tree line, along with a bunch of speeder bikes for making it up to the front quickly. Just be careful using those, as the forest is filled with all sorts of fallen large tree trunks and rocks and bits of debris that will just kill you outright if you hit them at high speed. So if you'd prefer to head to the fight on foot, but would still like to avoid the ground as much as possible. Above you will be a bunch of walkable platforms representing the native villages that can be accessed from ramps all over the rebel side of the map. It's a decent place to shoot down from, although of course being up there also means you're potentially trapped if a big group of the enemy decides to come after you and cuts off your only safe way down. These treetop villages are also the infinite spawn point for the little NPC Ewoks that are unique to this level that help the rebels out. In my experience, they honestly don't seem to contribute much, but I suppose they are technically more than nothing, and having them here is immersive and movie accurate. And maybe on occasion, one of them might distract an enemy soldier just long enough for you to slip by them unnoticed or take them out yourself. You should also note that hanging between the Ewok walkways in several places is a handful of suspended log traps, which will instantly take out any of the large Imperial walkers which go through them if they aren't disarmed first. People often don't realise this, but if you're playing as the Empire, you can shoot these before you walk into them to neutralise them. But if you don't do that, each one of these will take out an AT-ST walker, which is quite the trade-off. And more to that point, if you are playing as the Empire, hopefully you're familiar with your own side of the map and its unique features. The northern half of the level is still a forest, but it is noticeably less dense with the giant trees, and there's more relatively open clearings. You don't get the overhead walkways, but the Empire does have a lot more health and ammo droids scattered just behind their starting back lines, and they've got their own walkers and speeders lined up for deployment at the rear. Just like I said, with any vehicle on this map, more so than on any other, you might need to have a decent amount of situational awareness, lest you crash or walk right into a trap. And as much as you might want to go on the offensive with your big walking tanks, and you might even think that would be easy given how the rebels don't have their own big vehicles and the Ewoks aren't much in the way of any threat, that's not how this map is structured. The Empire is actually the one decidedly on the defensive here. Ideally, you're meant to be trying to hold the line in your little clearing, not overextending yourself trying to push out. It should be noted that, just like in the very last level of the campaign, the Imperial's final command post here is that titular Endor bunker. In the campaign, where you're always playing as the rebels, destroying it was the final objective. But on any multiplayer or instant action match here, it essentially just acts like a fortified command point. One that can't be captured by the enemy, but it can be destroyed outright. If you're an Empire main, you might think that it's good, because it means the other team can't steal it to use as a spawn point behind your line. But I would point out that, on the contrary, since they just need to destroy it to prevent you from having it, a rebel demolitions trooper or similar only has to be lucky and get behind your line once to deny you that point for the whole rest of the game. It's just something to keep in mind. Speaking of map objectives, it's worth noting what gameplay looks like here. For one thing, as I briefly noted earlier, as much as this Endor map looks like unending forest, the actual shape of the gameplay area does form a sort of linear rectangular corridor. A very wide corridor perhaps, but still a corridor nonetheless. And what this means in practice is that matches here on the Endor map, more often than not, look like one long push and pull along a single front. The occasional breakthroughs by an individual unit or two might happen here or there, but for the most part there is one front line. It's a marked contrast from a lot of the other maps in the game, where the fighting is more likely to devolve into a lot of smaller, discrete skirmishes all over the map. And that pattern matches here tend to fall into informs what classes you'll get the most out of on Endor. As I alluded to earlier, on the Rebel side, your big focus is going to be trying to push the enemy all the way back so you can destroy their final bunker, which itself can be managed with 2 or 3 fully stocked Vanguard demolitions troopers, once you're in a position to assault the bunker directly. And on the flip side of that, as the Imperials, even though you aren't going up against any vehicles stronger than the pretty flimsy speeder bikes, your rocket launchers and mines make for pretty effective area denial tools. So all around, the heavy troops on both sides are always a pretty good pick for this map. Of course, also on either side, the soldier class is likely going to be the bulk of your force, as it will be on most maps in the original Battlefront. And given that matches here on Endor are a fairly straightforward tug-of-war over that main front line, skill with a basic blaster rifle will be rewarded. Despite the asymmetric elements of this map's design, the combat here will typically come down to what team performs better at those gameplay fundamentals. To that end, I find some of the more specialised classes don't see as much use here compared to on other maps. That's not to say they can't be played, or even played well, but it's just worth keeping in mind. For instance, if you're a sniper, as much as the map here is quite long, and there are these elevated platforms, with how dense the trees are, often you'll find that unless you're at the front where the action is actively happening, it might be a bit hard to get a clean sightline to the enemy long enough to get your shots off. And while there are a few vehicles here on Endor, because of that asymmetry and the fact you don't get prolonged vehicle-to-vehicle fighting per se, you won't have that many opportunities as an engineer to focus on repairing anything. All these speeders are functionally single-use, either going straight to the front or being crashed and destroyed. And the walkers remain essentially untouched, unless they're instantly destroyed by one of the Ewoks' traps. So you're never in a situation where you need to fix anything quickly. Still, despite the fact this map naturally funnels people into particular roles, that doesn't mean you can't play as any given class, if only just for the fun of it, of course. And one of the great things about Battlefront, I would argue, is how, if there is a specific class you do prefer to play, there will be other maps that do cater to them. There's a lot of variety here in this game, and every map has its own identity. Endor Bunker does its specific thing. It fulfills its own gameplay niche. And like I said at the top of the video, it does a really good job of capturing that specific tone and atmosphere from the films within the confines of Battlefront's mechanics. That all said, if you might like to hear me break down what makes many of those other Battlefront maps so good, there will be a Battlefront map analysis playlist linked at the top of the description, or you can subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for the next video. Either way, goodbye for now, and have a lovely day.